which was a doozy. Which was a doozy. And one of the stats that I saw was first that the Texans was the first team to lose while having more offensive yards and no turnovers in the playoffs, and then proceed to lose. I thought that kind of summed up how the Chiefs have been this season pretty well, but also turned out to be the story of the entire divisional round. A lot of teams had more yards. I think all the games, the team that lost had more all-purpose yards
Yeah, every
and still
every winner
lost.
got outgained. Yeah.
And end of the day, it comes down to what plays are being made when a 30-yard rush from your own 20 that does a lot. That's a great play, but a 30-yard rush from the opponent's 30 that goes in for six, that means more at the end of the day. And the only thing that's bigger than that is turnovers. Turnovers were what makes or break your season at this part of the year, and that was the case for the Texans, the Lions, the Rams, and the Ravens.
Yeah.
Um, you turn it over at a bad time, that's it. So for the Chiefs, my prediction was 23-17. Was We had the same prediction for
Yeah.
that one, right?
We were on the same
And
page there.
the final score was 23-14, which I was very impressed with. Uh, not with the win. The win was okay. I was impressed with our predictions. And we mentioned Karlaftis. Chris Jones had a sack as well, who I predicted to be an X factor last week. I think my prediction for this game was pretty spot on. But Ryan, if you got any takeaways on this game, air them out.
Um, it was the most Chiefs game like imaginable. Mahomes hasn't thrown a football in a month. People are talking about that. Um, the regression from Travis Kelsey, and this guy puts up. He's moving at like 13 miles an hour, and this guy's getting a 58-yard gain. Um,
Just wide open up the
yeah,
middle.
it's absurd. These guys just know what it takes to win. They know how to do it. And I mean, Kelsey's playoff stats are absurd. His game log is
Yeah.
ridiculous. Um, the Texans left seven, might have been 7 points kicking off the board. I think they got a field goal block. They missed another one, and they missed an extra point. I think that's seven. Um,
Let me see.
so
2 for 3 on field goals. 0 for 1 on extra points. So yeah, left 4 points on the board.
I think Fairbairn missed a field goal. I think he missed a long field goal too.
Yeah, he missed a field goal and 1 extra point.
He had a field goal blocked at the end. It kind of didn't matter, but
Yeah, true, true. So yeah, you're right. That
I
would be
mean,
seven points.
it would have made our prediction matter if he made it. But
True. That would have been crazy.
um, yeah, I think the talk of the town of this game is the refereeing and the officiating.
100%.
It's a shame. The Mahomes is the face of the sport, like no question, and he's still really good, and you can't offset the stuff that's happening now with his previous success. My kind of big takeaway and a viewpoint on this is that if the Chiefs were winning like they did when they made that first Super Bowl and lost, where Mahomes is throwing for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns, I don't think anyone is complaining. If they're winning these games 38-31, I don't think anyone cares. But instead, they're winning, this slow, boring defensive football, and Mahomes is deferring to flag baiting, get the football equivalent term here, to churn out these timely plays and get extra yards, and it's not fair. It's almost more egregious than the fake slide, in my opinion. Like you were putting these defenders in unimaginable situations. You can't do anything. It's a lose lose situation no matter what you do. I think we even saw it during the year. Mahomes almost had a fake slide moment where I think he acted like he was running out of bounds and then he ran up the sideline for like 25 more yards. That's like, what are you supposed to do? You can't do anything. They need a rule about that. The refs get a biased whistle. I literally don't think it's a question at this point. I'll argue with a wall. You're losing the argument. You're probably only arguing against that if you're a Chiefs fan, to be honest. Don't get me wrong. It's not the reason they won the game. Like, the Texans lost the game. Like, 100%. The Chiefs outplayed the Texans.
Hmm.
Um, it's still a frustrating point that, like, needs to be brought up. And I just don't think that this Chiefs team has it. I don't know. I mean, we'll touch on it later with the conference championship prediction, which the matchup with the Bills and Josh Allen. But I don't know if this team has enough in the tank. I don't know if you can beat Buffalo scoring 23 points.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, all eyes are on how the whistle's going. That's been what everyone's talking about. Um, but that story could also get ended immediately if the Bills
Yeah.
go out and trample them this weekend. So it's kind of tough to call. But overall, in review, Texans not a great year, not the year they were expecting after
Yeah, I
what
saw
last season was.
they departed with Bobby Slowick, who after last year was getting a lot of head coaching talk. And this year very up and down. I know they had the injuries. The offensive line was like brutally bad. I know they're shuffling pieces again like they did last year with injuries, but I mean it's like the same group of guys. And they drafted Blake Fisher in the second round. It's pretty much the same group of guys. There's really no reason they should be that bad on the offensive line. Joe Mixon was a nice ad. Obviously, you lose Diggs, and Tank Dell had that terrible, terrible injury. Um, and then the only thing, my predictions for this game, I didn't really talk about. I talked about Pacheco. Kareem Hunt had a good game. Pacheco just has not been able to get going since the foot injury. And then Will Anderson for the Texans had 2 sacks. The tackles for the Chiefs are still not good.
Yeah, and could be an issue against the Bills. I'm I'm not gonna get into who I think is gonna win that matchup yet. We'll save that
Yeah,
for a few minutes.
for sure.
We're gonna move on to this next game, which was a thriller and the kind of football people want to see this time of year. Commanders taking down the number one seed Lions at Ford Field, 45-31. Uh, I couldn't be more wrong with my prediction about the Lions defense chasing down Jenny Daniels. Um, I did say last week that I don't think people are giving JD5 and that Commanders team a fair shot at the Lions, but I did not expect this. Not in any capacity did I expect them putting up 45 points against the number one seed in the NFC. Nowhere did I expect um, the Lions to turn the ball over like they did. And I didn't expect Jared Goff playing through what I think was a concussion.
Yeah, that
Uh,
was
I didn't expect
rough.
him to get concussed. That pick six, I'll stand on that. I think he was concussed there. Um, and
Well,
that could
he wasn't
there's
concussed before he threw the ball. He definitely was after he threw the
yeah,
ball. Good
yeah. There's
God.
no way you could convince me that
Ugh.
he was 100% after that hit. Before then, I would hear you and I'd brush it off because if we're being honest, there's probably plenty of concussions that happen throughout the game that
Yeah.
get ignored, um, brushed over. It's an issue, but that's not my call at all. Um, I don't. That's above my pay grade to
Yeah,
talk about that one.
not a great thing to speculate on for sure.
Yeah, but I don't think he was okay, and I think that in return caused some of the mistakes that happened on the Lions, and that's kind of the story of the Lions. Just injuries. I hate to blame it on one thing,
Yeah.
but if you're gonna cope one way, that's definitely the way to go. Uh, it sucks. No one likes injuries, but they happen. It's a part of the game. That's just the nature of the NFL. JD5 was the X factor. Brian Branch did have 8 solo tackles and a forced fumble, who I did mention last week. I think that's a pretty good game. And I also mentioned Jameer Gibbs, who had 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mentioned those because of my prediction last week, but ultimately wasn't enough. You could call it X factor, shows the X factor ability, but it wasn't an X factor in the game. Um, the story of the game is really just the commander stepping up to the plate, and everyone seems to be bought in on that side. And they're a scary team coming into this weekend. No doubt about it. But again, we'll talk about this weekend in a few. Ryan, what bits do you have about this game?
I think after I think Washington was what 7-2 after that Hail Mary against Chicago maybe, and
Yeah,
everyone was riding the wave. Um, and then they faltered a little bit. I want to say they were 8-5, maybe 7-5 even, and then they finished the season 12-5, and they've won 2 straight playoff games. They've won 7 in a row. The offense is humming. The defense is like looks competent. Don't get me wrong; it's not great. It's far from great.
They've
Um,
got their holes.
but it's like average enough to where the offense being so elite and so efficient is like it more than offsets. Like you're outscoring your opponent because your defense is just good enough. It's not like the Atlanta Falcons defense from when they made the Super Bowl. That defense was bad and made the occasional big play. This defense is just like steady enough. And that's a big difference. Ta- Takeaway from this game: 5 turnovers to none.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not winning a game when that's happening. We thought the Lions would win. That was a unanimous thing. I did mention specifically the nerves I had about the Lions defense has been a weak point the whole year. They got historically unlucky with injuries. Really unfortunate excuse. It's a pretty fair excuse. Don't get me wrong. They're playing like practice squad players who've been on the team for like a week. Like that's not fair. You're a 1 seed. You're in the playoffs. Unreal season and a really tragic way for it to end. Um, I think the talk of the town is more about Washington, though. I actually think the home field for Detroit benefited Washington way more than it did Detroit. Jaden being able to play in a dome is like the biggest advantage for him in the world. I feel like he's a warm weather quarterback. You can say what you want about those kind of guys. He did play in the NFC East this year, but ASU, LSU, I he operates better in the warm weather. It's what he's used to. Um, and I cited offensive players that needed to step up, and I mean they got contributions from absolutely everyone. Brian Robinson had 80 yards, 2 touchdowns. Eckler had 80 scrimmage yards. Jerry McNichols had a touchdown. Another really good game for Diami Brown, who's shout out playoff performer Diami Brown. This dude's done. I think he's like doubled his receiving total from the regular season in these 2 playoff games.
Last week it was playoff
Jahan
oh my
Dotson,
god. Playoff Jahan
the
Dotson
one
that
play.
we're
I don't know if
talking
he had a
about.
target in the last game, but it's fine.
Yeah.
Zach Ertz had a touchdown, and then I talked about the Commanders linebackers stopping the Lions running game, which did not happen. But Frankie Louvu had 9 tackles and a fumble recovery, and probably concussed Jared Goff. And Bobby Wagner had 8 tackles. He gets his game to game. The dog is booling right now.
Yeah. Yeah,
Probably
he's
very,
going crazy.
very loud. This is
It's cuz
ridiculous.
he knows our next topic. He knows what we're about to talk about next.
And then my key for the Lions defense was containing Jaden Daniels and getting some pass rush, and that absolutely
Mhm.
did not happen. So,
Yeah.
shout out Washington. This is just an awesome game for them, and I think Dan Quinn silenced a lot of haters. We'll see what happens when he comes up to an even bigger game in the NFC Championship. But man, Washington's a really fun team. Really, really fun team.
Yeah. Yeah. They're going to be awesome to watch. I got to give it to them. But I'll tell you about awesome teams, and I'll tell you about what wins championships. Everybody knows what wins championships. You know what wins championships. It's the defense. And the fact that last week in my prediction I didn't name Jalen Carter is 100% my fault because I knew better. I knew better, and if we're talking about the dogs. He's one of the dogs
Yeah.
in many ways. The Philly dogs, the Georgia dogs. He's I need him to recreate the picture of him picking up Jaden Daniels so bad. But that's for our next segment. Should have mentioned Jalen Carter. That's on me. Um, huge X factor as predicted. Saquon and the O line. I can't give credit to Saquon without crediting the boys up front.
I
Mekhi
actually
Becton had an interesting
I was
game
gonna say, yeah,
because
I do want to touch on that a little bit later because I mean,
because
I saw it a little bit, and a lot of it goes to the Jalen Hurts discourse. The
mm-hmm,
interior of the offensive line and pass protection has not been great.
it has been great. I will say, yeah, we could blame Jalen Hurts for some of it, not all of it. I think the safety was not on Jalen Hurts. A lot of people are going to could have dumped it to Goddard, but Landon Dickerson kind of he chip blocked the nose tackle lined up right in front of him. He's lined up right in front of him, like Pee Wee football. If there's a guy in front of you, you hit him, you block him. And then he chip blocks him. Why am I blanking on the left guard? Steen? Not Steen.
Well, Landon is the left
It's
guard.
Landon Dick. What?
Landon is the left guard.
Landon. Why am I? Okay, he's the left guard in the
Becton is
center.
at right guard. Center is Jurgens.
Becton's Jurgens. Yeah, so Cam Jurgens chips him on his left shoulder, and then Dickerson chips him on the right shoulder. So he's getting chipped on both sides, and then he's got a wide open lane straight to Jalen Hurts,
Yeah,
for the sack in the end zone.
I don't know if they were
I
running a stunt too, but he got kind of like bounced into other dude's space and just no one picked him up. It was really odd. It was the shortest time Jalen took a sack in that game. I think it was like less than 2 seconds he got sacked. So
yeah,
I mean, he took some bad sacks earlier, like long time to throw, and he just ate it, which is better than turning the ball over. But
mm-hmm.
missed out on some potential field goal opportunities earlier too. Yeah, interesting
Exactly.
game for the offensive line. I think they're propped up very highly, and I honestly think you could attribute a lot of the question marks from them so far on the fact that they've played really good front sevens.
Yeah,
The Packers and the Rams especially have unreal front sevens. They really do.
yeah. And I
But yeah,
I think they'll have a much better game this next week, but we're not talking about next week yet. Um, I mentioned Mekhi Becton, who against the Rams gets drilled by Jared Verse.
yeah, that was oh my
Um,
god, that play was hilarious.
that was rough. That was a tough watch. I'm sitting there like
Oh,
cringing at
oh my god,
cringing at
he
the TV
he just
screen.
like shoulder checked him too. He didn't even put his whole body weight into him.
Yeah, and then Mekhi Becton just he was shook, man. That was bad. But then Mekhi Becton also blew open the hole for that long Saquon touchdown,
Yeah,
and
they have their moments. Everyone on the offensive
like
line has their moments.
yeah, exactly. That goes with every offensive line. Overall, I'm not going to overanalyze Mekhi Becton or anyone else on that offensive line. That offensive line is solid, and it's the last thing I have to worry about. But before I move on from the O line, I want to say the last person you expect to make a critical mistake in this game, Lane Johnson on the tush push, 4th and 1,
Yeah, that was brutal.
at the goal line, basically, um, gets a bad false start. That was a bad false start, and that can't happen in that situation. And Lane Johnson's the last guy you'd expect, and I would bet that he doesn't make that mistake again for the rest of the playoffs. Um, whether that's one or two more games, I don't know, but
Yeah,
I doubt Lane Johnson makes that mistake twice because he knows more than anybody how critical of a false start that is. Because again, if it wasn't for a Jalen Carter sack, that could have been the season. Um, that's the last comment I really have. Other than that, they blew holes open for Saquon, who had 232 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts also had a long 44-yard touchdown run. That's 285 total rush yards and 3 total rush touchdowns against the Rams. So by no means am I trying to be nitpicky or overanalyze this offensive line. They're incredible, and no one should be upset with the performance. We can notice, some concerning plays, but I think I think they're fine. Jalen Carter, like I mentioned, 2 sacks and a forced fumble. Zach Bond, who is up for DPOI, he had a tackle for loss and a fumble recovery. And then Isaiah Rogers, who came in for injured Quinion Mitchell, who will be back next week. Um, he had a fumble recovery and a pretty sweet return on
yeah,
that.
dude, the spin move straight out of the scoop was impressive.
It was cinema. I was like, wow. I was like, he came to play. Um, Isaiah Rogers had an article from the Philadelphia Inquirer written about him, written by Marcus Hayes, who, if you recognize that name, criticized Embiid earlier this season and mentioned his deceased brother,
Oh
uh,
yeah,
but Arthur Embiid, who Joel named his son after. That was written by Marcus Hayes. So was this headline by Marcus Hayes that was titled something along the lines of disgraced gambler Isaiah Rogers
oh I do
gets
remember
playing
seeing
time.
that. Yeah,
And Isaiah Rogers responded to it on Twitter, basically calling him a goofy or a clown or something like that. Uh, but I want to say Isaiah Rogers, he did have some shaky moments in that game, which is expected. He's not a starter.
yeah,
You're coming into a pretty intense game. Mistakes will happen. But I think overall, with that fumble recovery, also helping how I look at his game as a whole too. Uh, I didn't really have an issue with this game. He held up decent. Nolan Smith had the strip sack, which we're big Nolan Smith guys on this
He's
show.
been unbelievable,
He's
and
been great, and I'm so happy
I've
for him.
I've been calling for the Nolan breakout since they got Vic, and I mean it is here and it is here in a big way.
Yeah,
Really fun player. My immediate thought is, what if this guy becomes Elvis Dumerville? But he is so much more athletic than Elvis Dumerville. It's like not even a competition, and he's also
yeah,
super slight. I think Elvis Dumerville was like 6 foot, like 260. Nolan might be like 240, if that.
yeah.
Like he is
Nolan Smith
he is an
has been
animal.
incredible.
If Vic can even, start replicating the Bond's coverage ability with Nolan down the line, I mean, one of the most versatile pieces in the league. If he's
Hmm.
able to, start dropping off into coverage a little bit more effectively, really fun player though. I mean, he is just swiping edges. The get off is unreal, and in the snow, if the offensive lineman oversets or tries to punch a little bit too much, they're slipping too. So most of the time, he's just running right by them.
Yeah,
Huge play. The takeaways again, massive.
and I do want to say on that fumble that was recovered by Isaiah Rodgers, there was an underrated play by C.J. Gardner Johnson within that play where ball's in the middle of probably five players, and there's a couple Rams players that are closer to it, I think.
Oh, and he kind of like punched it
But
out, didn't he?
he punched it out, which ended up right in the lane that
Yeah.
Isaiah Rodgers was running for. That play was, I mean, making that play is just as good as punching it out of Kyron Williams' arms to begin with. Uh, that that was a huge play, and I didn't want that to go unrecognized. Darius Slay also had a great game in coverage. Um,
That Puka catch though.
that was dirty.
Oh,
That was dirty.
dude. That
Puka had
was
a good game.
my heart sank. Like
Yeah, dude. I
that was
thought it.
scary hours, dude.
I thought we were gonna have to see Jalen Hurts 2 minute drill, if anything. I was slow word, but Slay did have a good game overall, um, and that last incompletion on fourth down from Matt Stafford. Did that remind you of any other Eagles playoff divisional game? Do you think of any other divisional game you can compare that to? I thought of Matt Ryan looking for Julio Jones on fourth down in the end zone, and he overthrows him to the outside, and it
Man,
goes incomplete.
I mean, Stafford like kind of didn't even throw to anybody. I
Yeah,
think
he
it just
kind of
slipped out of his hand.
yeah. I but the way the because in the moment watching it, just waiting, you're sitting on pins and needles. You
Yeah.
see him look at the guy outside and look to pass it. The second it's coming out of his hands, it's in God's hands at that point. I don't
The
know what's going on. And I just see it sail over to the sideline, and that's what it reminded me of personally.
that Falcons game, I think they ran like 7 or 8 plays at the goal line. It was disgusting.
Yeah,
That was gross. I remember I was at my
yeah.
aunt's house watching that game. That was disgusting.
You were rooting for the Falcons that game, right?
I mean, whenever the Falcons and Eagles were playing, I'd try to watch it with her. It's just like they were always fun games, but like
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, it's whatever. It was fine. It was just annoying. I think that was the year after they lost the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it was the year after. It was the year after they lost the Super Bowl to the Patriots, and it was the year before Eagles won the Super. It was the year the Eagles won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it was a Nick Foles year. Yeah.
Yeah, because they won that game, hosted the Vikings, and then went over to Minnesota anyways right
Yeah.
after to go play the Super Bowl. Um, that was the same year as the Minnesota Miracle,
Yeah,
Minneapolis
that was a
Miracle.
pretty crazy playoffs.
Blake Bortles made the AFC Championship game.
So did Case Keenum
Yup,
and Nick
yup,
Foles.
and Nick Foles, and then
Tom
Tom
Brady.
Brady, who did not win the Super Bowl that year
Nope.
against those three
And he
quarterbacks.
should have lost to Blake Bortles too. Don't even get me started.
Oh, no comment. No comment. Don't get me started. No comment.
God, that Jags team was so good. I love that Jags team.
Saxonville, man.
So fun.
We love throwbacks. We love throwbacks on bracket
I
coverage, bro.
love. I just live for the defensive teams, and then they have a name. No, the
It's
Legion of Boom, the No Fly Zone, Saxonville. God, iconic
yeah.
teams, iconic groups.
This Eagles defense needs a
Yeah,
name.
someone's got to
I
find a
guess
name for them.
Philly Dogs is the, but
Maybe,
that's not
maybe,
the same.
yeah.
I'm not. I like it, but not to compare at all to Saxonville, No Fly Zone, or
Yeah,
Legion of
yeah,
Boom.
it's not on the
They
same
need
level.
something new.
All right.
They,
I'm just
my
gonna.
last note on
Okay.
this Eagles game before I toss it over to you
Yeah.
is I was wrong. I do admit what I'm wrong on here, and I predicted an AJ Brown game. I projected a big game, but he had two catches for 14 yards. He did have a big conversion on fourth down,
Any of the drop
but
touchdown.
I'm delaying. It's not over. I'm just delaying it one more week. I think this weekend because I'm not going to explain why yet. I'm actually going to explain when we actually talk about the championship
I
matchups.
know what you're
I'm
gonna say
passing it to
too.
you.
I already
Yeah,
know. I already know what point you're gonna make later.
yeah,
Um.
yeah.
So some of my takeaways in this, we mentioned Saquon and Jalen Carter almost single-handedly won this game. While that's kind of true, you can't overlook the spot contributions from the role players on this team. Um, Jalix Hunt, Moro Ajomo. I'm a big Jalix Hunt guy. They both got a sack. They're both pretty timely sacks. There's contributions across the board from the defensive guys at least. Devontae had a couple catches. It wasn't really a big receiving game anyway. It was just kind of Saquon on
Hmm.
offense. And speaking of offense, I'll touch on the offensive line too. We were talking about a little bit before. The the down to down success rate of the Eagles running game is not great. It hasn't been very good. Now they've played two very good defenses, don't get me wrong. But I also almost don't care because if you're guaranteeing 1 to 2 plus yard runs a game, you can't just get rid of that.
Yeah,
It's like oh, if a guy in college runs for 250 yards but two of his runs are for 75-yard touchdowns, you're like, "Oh, you take those away, he only had 50 yards on, 15 carries." That's not how it works.
yeah.
You don't just take away those runs. That's 14 points and those are huge swings.
There's there's a fun saying in soccer. There's a fun video. It's a Liverpool fan who they're debating about Sadio Mane, who he played for Liverpool, and they somehow how he thinks he's the greatest player in the world. And he says, I don't do if buts. I don't do ifs or buts. I do absolutes. He says, if my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle,
Yeah,
but she
classic.
doesn't, so she
Yep.
isn't.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
yeah, if you take away 10 points from the Eagles, the Rams win 22-18. But I have bad news. They
Yeah.
scored 28.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
that's it.
So yeah, the Jalen Hurts run was big early on. I'll talk about Jalen in a little bit too. I just kind of want to try to touch on everybody here before I start extrapolating on a point. Braden Mann, underrated game. That dude was big for the special teams operation,
Yeah.
and Elliott had a borderline like scary game. Extra points you don't think about. The first thing that my coach in high school talked about when we were playing, when we're getting ready for situational, we're doing situational stuff in the locker room, kind of talking about that stuff. He emphasizes if you go and score a touchdown and miss the extra point, it's like you didn't score. If the other team
Yeah.
goes down and scores a touchdown, you lose. If they make
Yeah.
the extra point, obviously, that's another if, and it's not great to deal and operate that way. But when you're thinking about 6 points compared to 7 is a big difference, especially when you only need to outscore the other team by 1 point. Like, so Braden Mann had a couple of huge holds in there for field goals. Jake missed 2 extra points, which is not great. And I think one of the main points I said they need to score touchdowns. You need to score touchdowns and make the extra points. Um, getting the
Lock in,
7
Jake.
instead of the 6 is really important.
Yeah.
I touched on the offensive line in the running game. 34 carries, 285 yards. You're averaging like 8 yards a carry. And they say, oh, it's all on 3 runs. I don't care. That's 21 of your points. It just doesn't matter to me. And if you're busting those holes open and you're converting on the big runs, the down to down stuff, as long as you're in manageable situations, even if it's 3rd and 7 compared to a 3rd and 13, that's
Hmm.
better than taking a sack, which Jalen took many sacks from that Rams front. I'll hit on Jalen Hurts really quick. Him and Josh Allen had an almost identical game,
Yeah.
and no one said a single peep about Josh Allen. Um, this is what I emphasized in the last game too. These guys do, especially you even see with Mahomes now, which people are complaining about. These guys do what it takes to win in the context of the game you're playing.
Hmm.
If Mahomes needs to throw for 300 yards against Buffalo next week, or this weekend, it's not even next week, it's in a couple days. I guarantee you he would do it.
Yeah.
He could throw 150 yards to Noah Gray for all I care. He would find a way to do it.
It's game management.
Yeah, you're managing the game. He could have fumbled on the sacks. He didn't. He just ate it a lot of the time. Now,
Or
granted he could have thrown the ball away a lot of the time.
I was gonna say the thing about that though is Jalen in previous years, which was a huge criticism he's faced for the last his whole career, even going back to Alabama and Oklahoma. He panics when there's a guy in his face, and he'll toss it. Say AJ Brown's down there, he can win some 50-50s, but he'll end up throwing a 75-20 that gets intercepted. And end of the day, do I love how long he holds the ball? Not in the slightest. But I we can live with, as much as we hate to, a 10-yard sack rather than an interception.
Yeah,
And that is always that's always what I'll take. Like, I'd rather neither, but if I have to pick one,
yeah. That's
take a
always an
sack.
interesting conversation. I remember, I think the year they made the Super Bowl, they would overemphasize how bad he was rolling left.
Hmm.
I mean, he's a righty, but like a lot of quarterbacks make it work. He's kind of clunky when he moves out of the pocket.
Yeah,
Like he just moves like a running back. I don't really know how else to like when he's
like kind of
running.
like a stutter step, and you see the broad shoulders,
He's
and
very slow and methodical, and I don't think his build like allows him to contort his body the way that's required to make a throw when you're running to your left when you're a righty. That's some
mhm.
anatomical stuff you can debate later. I just kind of think that's like what I see with my eyes when I watch him.
Yeah,
There's some stuff you could look at about sacks being more devastating than turnovers. I you know there's analytics to back that up occasionally, but in playoff football, you got a defense you can trust. Don't turn the ball over. Don't let the defense
yeah,
make a play. Just eat it, and he ate it. He ate it bad on 2 drives early on. He could have maybe kicked a field goal, but at least you're playing field position at the very worst. I'll touch on the Rams too. Really good season for them. They were kind of dead in the water. I think they were 5-6. They finished 10-7. They win the NFC West. And McVay continues to adapt. I emphasize this as well. Their front seven is gross, dude. Kobe Turner, Jarrett Verse, Braden Fisk got injured. It's kind of unfortunate. They took Neville Gallimore from Dallas, who I think was like a day 2 pick. He had the safety. Um, I'm blanking on someone else on that front. Byron Young. Like they got dudes. Omar Spates had a really good game. He had the forced fumble
hmm
on Jalen at one point.
that got recovered by, was that Saquon who jumped on it?
Yeah, I think maybe Jalen got it
Something like
back. I
that.
don't really remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, those guys are super talented and super young. Um, Interested to see how they progress with Matt Stafford. Their offensive line is a little questionable. As long as McVay is there, it's just one of those situations. As long as McVay is there, the Rams will be good. Um, he, what is the saying? You get blood out of a stone or something like that. Like
I don't know
he
what
gets
that's
blood
saying.
out of a stone. He finds a way. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I don't. Rams are a pretty fun team. I like defenses, really young defense, aggressive front seven. It was a fun competitive game, and yeah, I don't have that many takeaways for them because they lost. To be honest, it kind of played out the
Mm-hmm.
way I expected it to. If I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, I mean, heavy run game. It's a snow game. The defense stands up. Maybe not exactly according to plan, but more or less the stats show kind of what we expected.
Yeah, it was a
Um,
very the stats were very indicative of what you saw on the field.
yeah, and I'll tell you what was not expected, in my opinion. Um, Bills 27, Ravens 25, and a rough Mark Andrews game. Um, but a rough Ravens game in general. Just a rough game overall. For me, this was kind of like a no notes kind of game. I have no comment on the two leading MVP candidates and how they played. And I have no comment on either of the running backs, so I thought would be X factors either. I don't really have much to say. I didn't expect, you know, neither team to hit 30. I thought this was gonna I thought this score was gonna look more like Commanders Lions, and I thought Commanders Lions would look more or less like this scoring wise. Um, I thought there was gonna be a lot more offense. I thought there was gonna be a lot more points. I predicted Rousseau had a good game. He had a sack, which is good, but nothing crazy. No one really filled up the stat sheet like I expected them to.
I said Ravens 27-24, so I was really close. Obviously, not getting the winner doesn't matter, but I
What was my score prediction? Wait, one sec. I gotta remember what I
yeah.
said. 38-31 in overtime. Yeah,
Oh
I
yes, I remember. I
almost went overtime.
Yeah, there's a funny stat I think I saw where the Ravens were undefeated when Derrick Henry runs for 85 yards and he had 84. So
Wow.
people can scrounge for those stats and stuff like that. I always think is funny. That's a funny little stat.
Maybe if they ran it on that 2 point,
Yeah, maybe.
who
I
knows?
there was some good stuff with Mark Andrews after the game. I think someone started a GoFundMe for him, and I think he donated it to a charity of his choice,
He
something
has a
along those lines.
foundation. He has a
Yeah,
foundation because he's been diabetic for a while, and he has a like a pediatric diabetes kind of foundation, and a lot of Bills fans, which they're known to do this as well.
yeah. Bills
Um,
Mafia, just easily one of the best fan bases of any sport anywhere.
you could
Uh,
find it all.
yeah,
You could find it
great,
all with them.
great people. I will touch on Mark Andrews though. That fumble was just like kind of mind boggling.
It was bad.
I don't know if he's fumbled in his entire career or at least a very very long time.
Yeah.
Um, and then obviously the drop 2 point conversion, which people can pull up Mark Andrews 2 point conversions all they want, and they're like 0 for 3 on attempts the last 3 years thrown to Mark Andrews.
Yeah.
So yeah, not questionable. Like maybe questionable. That drive by Lamar was like absolute perfection. Um, down the stretch, Isaiah Likely the sliding touchdown to try to tie it. Him and Bateman had great games.
Yeah.
They're really stepping up. They're going to be really good players next year. Isaiah Likely needs to lead the team in receiving next year. I'm kind of hope that happens. He's so good.
Yeah.
And then I was talking about the Bills linebackers because the Steelers really struggled containing Lamar. Lamar only had 39 yards rushing. Terrell Bernard, he's a splashy player, dude. The forced fumble and fumble recovery on Mark Andrews. Dorian Williams had 4 tackles. Matt Milano had 3. Um, it's the turnovers. The interception from Lamar led to points, and then the fumble from Lamar led to points. Um, and the fumble from Mark Andrews was really unfortunate situationally. Actually, I don't know if the
Hmm.
interception led to points, but the two fumbles definitely led to points.
Yeah.
Um, and the Bills end up winning by 2, and they got I think at least 10 points off those 2 turnovers. Uh,
The, the
so that's the big swing.
That's the big swing, and I hate people who act like that 2 point drop is the big swing because that's not it.
Yeah, no,
I was talking to my roommate about it, and he says, I mean, this is a everyone says this, but he said this. It was like if your season is coming down to a 2 point conversion, something went wrong before that 2 point
yeah.
conversion.
I mean,
That's just it.
they tried one earlier as well to tie the game at
Hmm.
21, and instead of it being 21-20, and then and it's 27-20, and you can tie 27-27 with extra point, then you're down 8.
Yeah,
It's a philosophy thing. Like I think in a playoff game, you should probably chase points.
yeah.
We'll talk about it with Notre Dame for a little bit. We don't have much to talk about in that game, but that is something I do want to talk about
Hmm.
with the 2 point conversions and how that whole fourth quarter kind of shook out. But yeah, like kind of in like another game where you watch these teams play, and I'm not really too surprised. I'm not really impressed either by anyone.
Yeah,
It
I'm not.
it just kind of sucks that Lamar can't win.
Yeah,
because him in the playoffs is kind of like, oh, I'm gonna do this Superman thing, and then I'm gonna turn it over, and then I'm gonna do
Yeah.
this Superman thing to make up for it, and it's like, oh, come, you can't keep doing this, man. Like
Yeah.
you gotta put it all together all at once. You had like 5 turnovers during the regular season. You had two in one game. I know that's maybe a little nitpicky and like whatever. It's a playoff defense, but like that's the big story. And Derrick Henry 16 for 84 is not a super inspiring game. I think he had like 200
Yeah.
on the Bills during the regular season. I don't know.
He had a huge game against the Bills. Yeah.
It's so strange with Harbaugh. He won a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco and a good defense, and but there's old players on that team, and this team just feels like it has all the talent in the world, and they got it together, and they just can't do it with Lamar. I really don't know what to pinpoint it on. And unfortunately, this game from Buffalo didn't inspire me that they could beat the Chiefs.
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel inspired by anybody other than the Commanders, which is why I think everyone's
Yeah,
flocking onto that bandwagon.
yeah,
They're
that's
the
fair.
only team that looks inspiring
Yeah,
and like all locked in
100%.
coming into this championship weekend.